We'll go ahead and call to order the City Administrative Search Committee for January 8th, 2018. First item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the December 27th, 2017 meeting.
I move we could approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 3 is the City Administrator job description and duties. With that, I'll first turn it over to our attorney, John, if you have any comments or suggestions as we undertake this evening.
Well, yeah, not necessarily with the job duties and description. I haven't taken a look at that as such. I did have a chance just now to take a look at the ordinance we have on the appointment of the city administrator. I believe under Missouri statute, it talks about the mayor, with the consent of the Board of Aldermen, has the ability to appoint city officers. And I think the lone exception to that, of which I'm aware, is the city clerk's position. And my understanding is that used to be the ordinance for the Smithville, but in 2006 it was switched. So that now it's the Board of Aldermen that make that determination with the consent of the mayor. And frankly, I believe it to be inaccurate. I believe that not in conformity with the state statute.
Okay.
So I think that change is going to need to be made. So.
Okay, I will ask if you could make a suggestion.
I will draft suggested language for you.
We will address that then the next time this group gets together.
Well, other Board of Aldermen, it'll have to be an ordinance. So
Sure, we're making changes, broad changes to this to take to the Board of Aldermen for approval. So,
All right. Thank you. That's the comment I've got on how the position is chosen.
very good. With that, I'll kind of open it for discussion, knowing that we're looking at kind of two things. One, the ordinance, which lays out the roles of the city administrator, and then two, the job description that is tied to said ordinance.
I didn't bring our with me our profile that we sent out, and I should have that in front. Should have brought that to have in front of me to kind of do a comparison. But the one thing I wondered, did we leave the age at 21, or did we raise that age to 25?
We raised it to 25, so I did go through and kind of highlight some things, and then we kind of kick off. So in that section 105-020, changing the age to 25, going through and clarifying how the position is hired, and then I'll also ask, and I think it's probably okay, but since we have you here, to go ahead and look at the removal language as well, since we're looking at the appointed, look at the removal as well, but change that from 21 to 25. Broadly, there's a lot of references to he in the document. Strongly suggest we change that to
He,
she, or him. I looked at possibly trying to just make it gender neutral, but there's too many references to other people in the document to change it to there. The other, under paragraph number 12, the use of public facilities, it talks about the Board of Aldermen of the City of Smithville does hereby authorize the city administrator or his or her designees to promulgate rules and policies related to the rental and use of public facilities. Have we now addressed this issue by creating the rental agreements that we've put in place?
I think that is part of the facility use policy that stepped into that realm. Prior to that, it was always the city administrator's, and then his decision was subject to review by the board independently of each one. To avoid that, we brought forth the policy so that everyone would know.
So you might put a tail on that to say something in conformity with policy established by the board.
I had that noted, and then based on the discussion at the work session and the use of additional lands there, I kind of noted that as well, but I don't believe that's addressed in the policy, so it wouldn't be bad.
What's addressed?
The farmland that's currently being used, if we were to take that off of farmland and use that for festivals and things, I don't think we have a policy that addresses the rental of that, so that language wouldn't be bad. Paragraph 13, my note says purchasing policy. I think this is okay, but
I don't have that in front of me. Could you read that for me, Jeff?
the administrator shall, under the direction of the mayor, in accordance with all rules, regulations, and policies promulgated by the Board of Aldermen, supervise the purchase of materials, supplies, and equipment, that contracts necessary for operation of or maintenance of the city services, receives sealed bids for purchases or contracts, and present them to the Board of Aldermen for approval. And advise the board advantages or disadvantages of contract and bid proposals. No purchase shall be made, contract let, or obligation incurred for any item or service which exceeds the current budget appropriation without the supplemental appropriation by the board. The administrator may issue such rules governing purchase procedures within the administrative organization.
We need to make reference to Chapter 150. Somehow, it's it's an ordinance identified as purchasing policy, but
In accordance with
yeah,
Chapter 150.
code of ordinances.
And that's the chapter that gives the
It's
city
purchasing policy.
administrator.
That's the actual purchasing policy. So this would allow that position to make administrative policies and stuff that allow this to happen.
Good.
This being the
Now, is it
rule.
the purchasing policy agreement that also states the spending limits for the?
Yeah, it's in here.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why I flagged it. Was I
And
didn't see-
then we were all gonna no, that was a board discussion, never mind. I was gonna say possibly raising that limit to, or changing the limit.
That's that's the actual ordinance change, and that's not subject to where we're sitting right
No,
now.
I understand, yeah. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yep.
Okay. Under section 105-040, bond, the bond amount we have is $10,000. The only question I had there was if
What
that
is-
was still appropriate.
Yeah, what is it for other cities typically? I would think it'd be 50,000 or something like that, just because if there's any issues.
Fiduciary bond, whatever you want to set it at,
Do you know what some of the other city bond limits are?
I thought I compared Platte City and Parkville, and I thought it was 10 when we were looking earlier, but just for comparison.
We may want to compare just what bonds are for other cities, because I don't want it, if theirs is 50 or 100, I don't want to be 10,000. Well, thank you.
I know this discussion is specifically related to the city administrator, but wanted to ensure that other relevant staff are appropriately bonded as well.
And much of that we work with our insurance provider to make sure we've got the bonds that they.
What do they require?
And then part of that was the city administrator job description. We previously had gone through and on October 24th, updated that job description. I'm bringing forth two recommended changes. One, both at the beginning of the job description, to include the department as administration and reports to the mayor and board of aldermen. Otherwise, I believe that job description that we have previously worked on meets the requirements and suggestions of this group.
Thank you.
There were some things in here that I was,
Carney's is 50. Okay.
Oh, I'll just have to bring, I mean, this would be a good time to bring it up.
I have something else I'd like to bring up, but
Sure.
now appropriate?
Sure.
Okay. I've always had issue in my own mind when I read section 105.060.
Okay.
And it says, neither the mayor nor any member of the Board of Aldermen should directly interfere with the conduct of any department or duties of employees subordinate to the city administrator. My concern with that is that I believe the city administrator by state statute and otherwise is the assistant to the mayor. And while I think that language, I have no issue with it with the individual Board of Aldermen, I do have some issue with that language with regard to a mayor. If a mayor says one and a city administrator says two, I think it's one until the Board of Aldermen speak otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think I've always had problems with that ordinance as in essence directing that in some ways the mayor cannot direct city employees to do things. And by statute and by ordinance, I think the mayor is the final say in the administration of the city. And what we've done is we've carved out some additional aid for the mayor by the city by adopting the city administrator type of government. But I'm concerned with that ordinance and that wording of that ordinance. So I would just take out the first little part, neither the mayor, you should say, no member of the Board of Aldermen shall directly. I have no issue with that, but I do have an issue with the mayor. I've always had an issue with that in the ordinance.
City as well.
Okay.
Is it 50?
5-0 for both of them.
I couldn't remember. I knew I looked, but I couldn't
bond.
remember.
50?
5-0.
So first, kind of taking on John's point, 105.020 refers to the city administrator as, gosh, where is it now? I'm sorry, 030. The city administrator shall be the chief administrative assistant to the mayor and subject to the supervision and direction of the mayor, and as such be the chief administrative officer of the city. So I think in order to make those two.
I've always found those inconsistent, and I found 105.060 to be contrary to state statute.
Now, I guess, on the very first page you sent out, Jeff, then, where it says city administrator, mayor and board of aldermen, it said the city administrator under the direction of the mayor shall serve as the chief executive officer of the city. Does that conflict?
I don't have a problem with that per se.
But I think that's the old one that
Oh, that's the
we
old.
now
Okay.
have updated.
Okay. I just want to make sure that wasn't what we were proposing.
And then back to 105.040 on the bond. As we've now clarified that both Pot City and Kearney are at 50,000.
That was my error in my trying to remember, so I apologize for that.
That's okay. We'll let it go this time. So it'll be 50,000 rather than 10,000. I thought 10,000 was a little low.
Any other changes related to the ordinance or the updated job description from 10/27, 10/24/17?
Not that it deals with those changes, but I'm looking down in the job duties and descriptions, and there's a bullet point down here where it talks about, if I didn't scan past it, the administrator shall supervise and coordinate with the community development director. Does that need to be changed to just development director? Because in your presentation, you talked about the community development department, like where that had been combined with the economic development department and merged into the development department. So should we take out community? Because in your
Yeah, it would make it
flow
more
chart, it just talks about development director.
So So remove the word community.
Yeah.
off that.
Which number are you speaking of?
Well, it's just the bullet
It's a bullet
points.
point, two-thirds
Okay.
of the way down,
It's on,
second page.
on the job description, not the ordinance?
Right.
Okay.
I think we probably need to run a copy. I think that might be the old one. This is the new one that we did in October.
Okay,
So with
and I'm looking at what's here.
Well, that's, the good thing is, this is easy enough to change on the fly because it's not an ordinance.
Okay, so,
The biggest thing for me, this job description aspect, my biggest concern would be that it comports with what the ordinance says. As long as it doesn't conflict with the ordinance, it's going to be fine.
Our local ordinance, or you're referring to state statute?
Well, our local ordinance has to comport with state law. If that is the case, then this has to say the same thing as the city ordinance. This can't change the city ordinance.
Correct.
The bigger question you need to ask yourself is this really necessary?
This job description?
Yeah.
And I will offer, in my opinion, yes, I believe it is. And I'd like to take it one step further and out of that, create a job review template based on, how did you perform in the functions of the job as we lay out.
I do have a question under the job duties that's currently on our website. And where it says, "The administrator shall, under the supervision of the mayor, act as the personnel officer of the city. She shall advise and recommend to the mayor and the board of aldermen concerning the appointment or dismissal of department heads and other appointive officers." So when I read that, my question is, when chief promoted someone to captain, is that meaning this, or is this something separate?
No, I think it would be, department head would be chief of public safety is subject to that. And any individual department head, parks, street,
I don't
water.
think,
And other appointed officers wouldn't be,
typically,
Okay.
as the mayor, I'm not the one that hires those people, it's typically our department heads, so I would assume.
Yeah.
I was just curious when I was just reading it, I just wanted clarification from
And
myself.
sometimes the word officer can be confusing when you're
Yeah.
in a family of police.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted clarification for myself, so thank you.
Yeah.
So as you review that other document, when I walk through the changes that we made to the ordinance, then I'll ask for a motion to approve those changes. Overall, change the he language to he, she, he, or her, him. Change the age from 21 to 25. We'll get updated language on the appointment and recommendation on the removal thereof. consider it another time.
So that I understand what we're doing, this motion is for your recommendation to the board.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Correct. Is just to state so everyone's clear, this committee does not have
Right.
the authority to make change to the, but we do have the authority to make recommendations to the board.
Correct.
Under paragraph number 12, make reference to the rental use agreements, and that this shall remain in conformity with the policy established by the Board of Aldermen. Under 13, we'll reference chapter 150, purchasing policy to ensure that we properly articulate the ability of the city administrator to make such purchases as approved by the board under that authority. Section 105-040 for bond, we'll change the bond amount to $50,000 from $10,000. And under section 105-060, strike neither the mayor nor any. And so it would then read, no member of the Board of Aldermen shall directly interfere with the conduct of any department or duties or employees subordinate to the city administrator except at the express direction of the Board of Aldermen or with the approval of the city administrator.
I think those are all the changes we had discussed.
With that, do we need to,
Jeff,
do we need to vote on this? Or
one more comment on the proposed removal from office. We're not including that.
No, we'll revisit
Because
that.
obviously that's related to state statute, so.
We can update that language for advice of council.
That sounds good to me. I made notes here just a little bit.
Then on to the,
Do we need a motion on that, Chairman?
why don't we take one just so we have it?
Okay, I make a motion to make the changes as referenced to section 105.20 as it relates to age, and all the changing of he to he, she, he, her, the change to section or item number 12, number 13, and section 105.040 and 105.060.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, on to the job description.
All I really have is the one that I mentioned earlier about removing community from the development director on that bullet point. Which is in the page right ahead of requirements, our current, we currently have out on the website. Then we don't know if we had anything.
So the fourth paragraph at the bottom on page 2, making that change.
Yes.
What I might suggest that you do, once you've got the duties and responsibilities in the form in which you're comfortable with, I mean, we've obviously had ordinances and so forth, but what you may want to do, and the simplest thing may be to incorporate those into the contract that you do with whomever it is. And we'll just put a bullet at the end that says, you know, nothing herein shall be construed to be in conflict with any ordinance or with any statute. If there is any conflict, the ordinance or statute prevails. Otherwise, if you're writing his or her contract, and so when you go to your evaluation period, you just pull the contract out and says, look, this is what we signed. These are the, immediately going back to our evaluation form.
Perfect.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
So to clarify for Melissa's first question about the administrative shall under the supervision of the mayor, where it comes down to appoint officers, that was just clarification, okay,
Just for my
okay.
information.
As we're discussing ordinance and job description, point of clarification from an earlier discussion, there is no residency requirement inside the ordinance. There was one reference in contract, but there's nothing in the ordinance that requires that for this position.
Oh, that's right, yeah, I remember seeing it somewhere, but obviously it wasn't in one of our ordinances.
With that, any other suggested changes, comments?
I think we're good to go.
We do not have any updates from a personnel perspective from the search firm. The job is posted and on the street, if you will, for people to apply. That is available on the SGR website. A link can be found on our website for those who are so interested. I anticipate that it won't be too terribly long, and we will be meeting and going into executive session to review those personnel matters. So for those tracking, expect that before too terribly long.
Once we begin that process, I would anticipate we would probably meet more often as a committee,
I anticipate we'll be meeting
fairly frequently.
meeting more frequently to review, and as you may remember, the first blush will be the rankings that the firm has done from A, B, and C, and confirming there's none from B that we want to pull up into A, and create a semifinalist, and then proceed forward with some additional information from those candidates to inform a discussion that we'll then sit down and review and create the list of finalists to take forward to the community board for processing.
As well as just define the process and the logistics of how we're going to do that in relation to the board and the community.
With that, I would offer that based on the changes that we've made here, knowing the language it will have to include, I'm not sure we need to revisit this again. I can probably work with staff to bring in and ask that this be added to the board agenda. Unless you feel that you want to take a second look at it.
No, I'm fine with you working with staff with what we've discussed here this evening.
Yep.
With that, if there's any surprises that come forth from the language, I think it's pretty straightforward. We're rolling directly back to state statute.
So who's going to be responsible for making those changes for the gender neutral, et cetera? Will that be staff doing that on that recommendation?
Linda has volunteered her, not exactly volunteered her time, but and so
has offered her time to do that?
she's done a phenomenal job of helping make changes here, so I want to give kudos to her. With that, if there's no other business, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Wait, one question, will we bring this to the next meeting on the 16th?
I think it all depends on,
Well, I think if we can get the information and review back from legal, from John, perhaps we should meet one more time as a committee prior to the 16th, just to ensure.
16th is next week, right?
Oh, that is,
It's off short time.
yeah.
Just reminding you.
Could staff send out?
Linda's busy.
Could we review that before it goes to the packet?
Sorry? Well, for the,
as a mayor, you
for
have
the,
arranged packet, so.
yeah, February 6th meeting, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And if you want to have a meeting of the search committee following, somewhere between the 16th and the 6th, certainly could do that. So you could have a fully recognized reference to make to the board. Here's our recommendation, this ordinance and these
Did
changes.
you want to make the reference, did you want to make the proposal to the board next week?
I don't think we're in a great rush
Good, okay.
on this.
I would agree with that. I want to make sure we have an opportunity to look at the final product and make sure it's done right before we go to the board.
So you do want to see it again before it goes to the board?
Well, I'll see it again before then, because,
Yes.
So probably the February 2nd meeting,
Yeah,
or 6th, February 6th meeting.
I think the February 6th is probably the appropriate time. How about we do this? If there are any changes that are substantial to this, we'll make sure to call a meeting prior to that. If the change is simply inserting the language from John that directly ties back to Missouri statute, we'll just bring it to the February 6th meeting and go from there.
okay, I'm good with that.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion and second to adjourn, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Good evening.
I'm sorry, what?
Said, thanks, John, for hanging around on this one.
All I heard was hanging around. I went, again?